Welcome back into another edition of the Lockdown Podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you smash the like button and, of course, subscribe to the ESPN LA YouTube channel. And if you're listening to the audio accompaniment or you're not, and you're like, wait a minute, there's an audio accompaniment, you go to the Sedano and Cap podcast, wherever you find your podcast, and Lockdown will be a separate link in each and every part of the Sedano and Cap feed. So, for example, when we do Sedano and Cap, there's the show is broken down by hour, the 3 different hours. Lockdown will be a separate hour. And today we are joined by friend of the program, Ramona Shelburne, ESPN NBA insider, reporter. She is juggling babies and toddlers and NBA investigative reporting at the same time. Momo, thank you for joining us.
How's it going, George?
Oh, it's going. But I think that you and I, this is the perfect time to have you on because I like to call this speculation season. Ooh. And, listen, we're 3 weeks away from the trade deadline. So everybody is speculating. The ESPN trade machine is getting overworked at the moment. Everybody is logging on at the moment, trying to figure out how to make their teams better. You and I will discuss a good number of teams here over the next couple of minutes, and how they can potentially get better, or if you think that they may stand back. Right. So we'll get into some of that stuff. Now, you and I are based in LA. Let's start with the LA teams. Now, everyone's going to want us to start with the Lakers, but you know what? You can hold on for a second if you're a Laker fan, okay? Let's start with the Clippers, who just a couple of weeks ago were in that kind of 4, 5, 6 range. Yeah. And now all of a sudden, Paul George goes down again. Kawhi's been in and out. Like, there's no consistency to this thing. Mm-hmm. And, Bob Voulgaris tweeted this out yesterday where he's like, look, I get the load management stuff, but this is kind of weird when you're the Clippers and you haven't won anything. And I'm kind of with Bob in that. Like, I've been in on the Clippers for the last couple of years. They're going to do it. They'll figure it out. But now I'm kind of out on them, at least for now. What do you make of the Clippers overall? And then we can kind of dive into what potential moves they could make, whether it's shipping guys out or bringing guys back in.
Yeah, sometimes when you're around a team, George, you can feel like they'll be fine. They have a confidence about them. They have a I know how to win. We just need to get ourselves to the postseason and be healthy at the right time. I still feel that way about the Golden State Warriors. I know people are down on them and they have to figure out their bench and James Wiseman, yada, yada, yada. But I still feel like in the West, when it comes time for the playoffs, if they're healthy, they'll figure it out and they'll either be in the conference finals or the finals. Like, it's just something I have a confidence about it with the Warriors. I don't have that confidence with the Clippers, and I want to because I think they do have the talent. But lately, when I've been around that team, it just feels like something ain't right. It's just something that's not. There's no center. Like it used to. I used to feel like Tyronn Lue was, on top of everything and everything was kind of going according to some sort of plan, even though it was a weird, frustrating load management plan, there was at least a plan. I don't necessarily feel like everyone's on the same page right now when you're talking about the Clippers. And a lot of that starts with Kawhi because he's so hard to put your finger on and figure out what he's doing and what he's going to be able to do and when he's going to play, when he's not going to play. And it's just his style. It's if you can manage that, which I think the Toronto Raptors did really well for 1 year. The Clippers did really well for a year or two, but it's now year, 3, 4 of this. And I think that the sort of constant just waiting for Godot, right? Waiting for Kawhi to show up and be Kawhi. It just wears on people because everybody else has to kind of figure out what to do with the rest of with how to prepare. And I don't know. I guess I had a morning like this. Okay, you know how you have a bunch of plans and you're kind of waiting to commit to timing. Like you and I were trying to schedule this podcast, and I was like, you were like, what time? And I was like, I think I want to say I had a call at 9:30 that was supposed to happen. And I thought, let's make sure we give that at least a half hour, maybe 45 minutes. And then I'm going to probably need to see the baby before he takes a nap around 10:15. So like, let's say 11 just to be safe. Right. But I don't think I hit you back on it to say what time until the right before. And then but the 9:30 was not confirmed. It was like a probable. Right.
Right.
And then there was something else that came in late that I was like, oh, I wish I could do that, but I don't know because there's something else that might come in that call. And And that's kind of like it's like playing with Kawhi. Like,
you
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you can't lock anything in. Like you just can't set your day and set your schedule and say, okay, I'm going to take the toddler to school and I'm going to make sure I bring my shoes so that I can go here afterwards. And after that, I'm doing this. Like it's impossible to set your schedule and set your eyes or set your framework around him because you just don't really have a good read on him from one day to the next. And I think it just gets that's what it feels like to me when I'm around the Clippers. It's just sort of like somebody who doesn't tell you until the last second if you're going to do something. And you sort of have to leave open the possibility that you might do something with them.
Yeah.
Are you getting my metaphor here?
I totally get it. And look, it's funny because when I've only done one of their games this year. So I talked to someone there and I asked them at that time, because it was like December-ish. Yeah. And I was like, hey, so are you guys kind of annoyed you didn't get a Christmas game? And the person responded to me and said, why would we be annoyed? We don't even know who's going to play night to night.
Yeah.
So why would we get a Christmas game? And then the other thing that kind of you just kind of like made me think about, I've had Phoenix a million times this year, and obviously they're dealing with their own set of injuries. And Monty Williams has consistently talked to us about, how the drive into work when you're a player is different based on whether you're going to be a starter or you're going to be a backup, particularly for guys who are not normally starters, right? And he was talking about kind of his own situation coming up in the league as a player, right? Like when he knew all of a sudden a player was going to be out and he had to get the start, that drive in was different than when he knew he was going to be a backup on that particular night, right? Like the entire way you got ready for the game is different. And with the Clippers, for example, Marcus Morris Sr. and Reggie Jackson, let's just say, have a completely different idea of what their workload is going to be when those two guys, or at least one of those guys, isn't playing, let alone when both of them aren't playing. And to your point, we've learned this. I mean, at least I have it. I'm sure you have as well. These guys, man, they love their rhythm, okay? Yeah. They are creatures of habit. And when you break them out of their habit and there's no habits to actually attach yourself to, then it becomes even more potentially chaotic when it comes to in-game scenarios. Yeah.
And I think the other big thing with the Clippers is they have, I would say there's three issues. One is the sort of nightly unpredictability, inability to lock anything in or build some rhythm. Like James Harden had a line to me the other night. He's like, we just need to catch a rhythm. Catch a rhythm, like how can you catch a rhythm when it's just so different every day? But the other thing is they really have been disappointed in the point guard play that they've gotten this year, right? John Wall was a big signing for them. He's had some good moments, but it hasn't really been the answer there. Reggie Jackson was starting for a while, and then he's kind of fallen out of the rotation a bit, or he's in and out, but depending on who's playing. Terrence Mann has been the new guy they're trying there, and I think he's been good there, but he's not a traditional point guard. Right. So a lot of the point guarding duties are coming from Paul and Kawhi of the running the offense, which is good. They're both very capable. They're great at with the ball in their hands, and they're both capable of initiating an offense. But again, that's not their skill set either. In a way, they'd be better off with a more traditional point guard who could just take some of the strain off of them in terms of offense creation. Because when you're expending a lot of money, a lot of energy creating offense, then that's energy you don't have on the back end on defense, or that's energy you don't necessarily have with your legs as you're trying to shoot, a lot of threes, or it's a carryover effect for both guys. And so I think they just need a little help in the playmaking department.
But they've been trying thing for them forever, I feel, since those two guys have been there, But
it's also the type of point guard that you want. We're not talking about a huge star. Like, there's a sense like if you just kind of had like a, Monty Morris type, right? Like a good role player who can, organize an offense, like that would be good for them. That might really help. And in some ways Reggie can do that, but he's also kind of a scoring point guard. So they've never quite had the right fit, because finding the right kind of point guard.
TJ McConnell.
Yeah. TJ McConnell, somebody like that. Yeah. And so I think that's part of the issue here. And then I think the larger issue, and this is just a generic issue. I think we saw this with the Lakers a couple of years ago when they went out, and it was the year after the championship when they went and added to a lot of They added like Marc Gasol, and they added, a bunch of other players in it to get some more depth. They just ended up creating confusion. So the Clippers have a lot of really good wing players.
Yeah.
They have a lot of depth in those positions, but that also means you have confusion in roles, and people are just different night to night. And what night is Batum going to play, and which night is Rocco going to get more time, and what night is, when is Norman Powell going to shine, and are they all going to play together? And if so, then who does what? So there's a lot of duplication of talent, which rather than saying, oh, we have a lot of great depth, it should be great on a team where our two best players are in and out of the lineup all the time. That could be a positive. But in this case, I think it's sort of creating a bit of confusion, and it's hard for people to find their roles. Yeah,
they have too many guys. You never would think that an NBA team would feel like that's the case. Yeah. But they have too many guys. And to your point, there's duplication there. There's guys that have similar skill sets. Like Robert Covington, I thought for a while, I'm like, I guess they're going to trade him because he doesn't really play. Yeah. And by the way, a lot of teams could use a Robert Covington who's got a manageable contract. He signed for one more year at $11 million. Like Lawrence Frank and that group are going to have to figure out, which is why when I started this conversation with you, and maybe this is where we'll go now, is do they just need to ship guys out and get better fits as opposed to just accumulating talent?
Yeah, because I think because Ty Lue is such a good coach, you want to give him a lot of options of how to play in different lineup combinations. So they have some big lineups with Moses Brown and Ivica Zubac. They have some of those kind of lineups. So you figure when they play Denver, like you're going to want Zubac in there against Jokic, right? When they play Minnesota, you want some bigs in there because they got two bigs, right? You get Karl Towns and Gobert. But when you play the Warriors, you're going to have to go small. So like, it's nice to have a bit of a mix and a match quality, but I think at this point in the season, at least, it feels muddled. Yeah, that's the right word. It feels muddled. By the way, can you get like a product placement here? I don't know.
Yeah, just water.
Drinking this, the hint of lemon. I'm sort of mildly obsessed with that. And then my other find is Wonder Melon with the lemon cayenne. Okay. Sounds gross, but it's super good.
Yeah.
I will be drinking them throughout our podcast.
All right, let's do it. Yeah, hydrate. Always keeping hydrated is important. I just have a regular old glass of water. Like
okay.
That's just regular old glass.
I figure, you want to get some sponsorship for your pod, so I'll just,
we can. Hopefully that will happen sooner rather than later. To be honest with you, So I just think to your point, they got to move. They got to make moves, and I honestly think they could use another big man because Zubac tends to sit in certain scenarios. And I almost feel like they need not this guy, obviously, because he's on a team that's, in the thick of it, but like a Nick Claxton type, right? Where they is a little
everybody would love a Nick Claxton type, right? He's having a great year.
A little more rangy, right? And can just more athletic. Zoo has been fantastic for them. I know that there's been chatter about Miles Turner, but I just don't know how they get to someone like Miles Turner, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Like the Lakers last year, I remember they had a similar thing. Like they had so many older players. At some point, they just needed someone with some energy.
Yeah.
So they went and got Wenyen Gabriel, who's been great for them. Yeah. Like every game is a Wenyen Gabriel game because he's bouncy and he's energetic and he's got some, he's got a little range. He can guard on the perimeter too.
So you think the Clippers move is a more traditional point guard? Because look, they've got a kid that they're trying to develop it, Jason Peters, right? I believe.
Preston, yeah.
Preston, sorry, Jason Preston. And look, I think eventually maybe he turns into that guy. I've seen him play in the G League a ton of times. Yeah. And this is kind of the other thing with them that we haven't even discussed. Sorry, Jason Presley is is an actor. Jason Preston.
Well, there's also Jason Priestley.
And there is Jason Priestley from 90210, correct.
That's probably what you had on the brain.
That is probably what I had on my brain. But and then they have this whole other group of young guys who played really well for them last year when all these guys were hurt. Brandon Boston, Jason Preston didn't play. But Terrence Mann, who I feel like they kind of messed with his development. Amir Coffey is another guy that they have.
They've been him in a little bit.
Those guys played a ton last year, and this year have not played very much.
Well, because they went and got John Wall.
Right. And to your right, then Norman Powell is healthy, and they have Robert Covington on the roster. So they need to figure out what they're going to do. And some of those young guys, honestly, I think can help them in this potential trade scenario because there are teams that would covet some of those guys too.
Yeah. And I think, there's a part of me that says you should just let this group play it out and catch a rhythm, catch a rhythm as Harden says. And another part of me says, just make some decisions so everybody can have some clarity.
Yeah.
So I'm sure those are the discussions that are taking place in that well-stocked front office of theirs.
Yeah. Again, they're in kind of a weird place. They are well-stocked. They have so many.
They have like 5 GMs that could be GMs at any other team. Like they have 5 of them.
But it also goes to show you how much people love living in LA, right? That I'm like,
yeah, well, they also have an owner who can pay 5 GMs.
That's true. That is true too. There's that part of the equation.
And they value differences of opinion and people who can do research, and they go out and take swings on guys like Lee Jenkins, who's a great information collector and analyzer of personalities. Like, it's a well-stocked front office, which I think is, and I say this because it's a contrast to the other team in Los Angeles, who just is, they have one decision maker and they have a couple of other voices in there, but not a lot of other voices. There's a sort of singular focus and decision making with the Lakers, whereas with the Clippers, Lawrence Frank is there, but then you also have Michael Winger and Trent, and there's so many different people there who where's to I don't know if you'd say one's better than the other, but they're very different ways of operating.
Certainly completely different philosophy. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I am curious to see what they do, because they have maneuverability. Because people say, well, they don't have assets to give up to get like a Miles Turner. Yeah. But maybe Indiana covets those young guys we just talked about.
Yeah, and they also have a lot of very manageable contracts.
Right. Right. They have contracts from all over the place. They got a guy who makes $6 million, a guy who makes $12 million, a guy who makes, 30 million, whatever. You know what I mean? 15 in Morris. So they've got a lot of different contracts that they can maneuver around with some young players, albeit them not picks. Look, you and I have had this conversation. The picks thing, to me, like, I get it in certain scenarios. I just think now we've jumped the shark with picks. Now, not every pick is going to end up being Giannis Antetokounmpo. No. You know what I'm saying? Like we need to stop with this, where like all of a sudden it's 5 picks, 4 picks, and 4 pick swaps. I mean, listen, get it if you can get it, but that doesn't mean all of that is going to work out. And I say that mostly not only to teams, but to fans too, because they just assume like, oh, this is going to work out. I mean, if you look at every draft, if I had to guess, what do you have? 2, maybe 3 impact players? Like, maybe there's probably like 1.5 to 2 franchise players in every draft.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. So you're buying lottery tickets is what you're buying in those scenarios when you're buying picks and pick swaps. They're not all going to work out. Doesn't mean you can't get role players that work in this, that, and the other if you have a good front office. But I just feel like this whole thing that picks are this panacea. I don't buy that either. Okay. Yeah. So, but let's talk about the Lakers, because you brought them up.
Yeah.
And oh boy, they have had a interesting season, to say the least, where they've had good runs and they've had bad runs. They've had awful injury luck, as they've had really for the last several years. Let's start with the injury stuff, okay? And then we can get into kind of the team a little later, and then potentially what they can do from a maneuverability standpoint. Where are we with AD? I know that Dave McMiniman was on my radio show recently, said, hey, AD could be back potentially in a week, and that was just a couple days ago. Where are we on the ramp-up process with AD?
So I have some fresh stuff for you there, George. He's really pushing it this week. The idea is he's really going to try to test it in the ramp up this week. And, let's back up and frame the whole situation a little bit better, because I don't know if people have their heads around this. Okay. The injury he has is a scary injury for any big man. And really for anybody, but especially for big men. It's the same kind of injury Joel Embiid had when he was a rookie. It cost him a couple seasons. It's the same kind of injury Yao Ming had that ended his career in a lot of ways. So it's the stress reaction is scary, which is why they have been so cautious with it. So you get these sort of conflicting reports that he feels really good or he feels fine, but they're all very cautious and scared to really do much with it because of what could happen if things go the wrong way with it. You don't want to push him too hard or too early before he's had a chance to calm down, and then have him be out for 2 years. Like, you just don't want that potential. You always say with an injury, can it get worse? This one can get worse. So that's why they're being so cautious. So anybody who tells you they know when he's coming back is doing you a disservice, because they don't know. You don't know how it's going to be because you have to be this cautious. As he is ramping up, he has to eventually test it. And so he's, the idea is he's going to push it hard this week, next week, see how he feels afterwards. But he hasn't really been able to do all that much, which means you need 3, 4, 5 days of pretty hard work, but then also conditioning to get back to playing an NBA game. I mean, you can't just not do anything it's been, what was it, December 18th he got hurt?
Yeah.
So it's been a month. You can't go light, for a month and then all of a sudden have your wind and your conditioning to play in an NBA game. I'm sure he's been able to do some kind of conditioning that's not load bearing, but it's not the same as running up and down a basketball court. So I think this week is really important. And then especially next week to see how he comes through, how he tests it. There's a sense, could he play next week? I would be highly skeptical of that just because of how cautious I know they have to be with it. But could, early February or, right before the trade deadline be okay? Maybe if everything goes well.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine if you're him, I actually think that a good target would be that week before the trade deadline because, well, for obvious reasons, if you're the Lakers, that would be the ideal scenario too, because you can see what you have. Yeah. And he also then has about a week off to kind of rest because of the All-Star break, right? So that actually makes a ton of sense for a number of different reasons, both for him individually and for the team. Look, I mean, he was playing out of his mind in this when he was healthy, and we were finally starting to see bubble AD again. So that was certainly something that I think we're excited about. And then there was, remember back then, a month ago, it's so funny how a month ago feels like 7 years ago. It's like dog years in the NBA. Remember a month ago, when he was playing at that level, we were like, wait, but can LeBron play with him? Like, wait, what are we talking about here? Like, LeBron can't play with him? Like, we saw them play together. No, but AD needs to be the man. Can LeBron be secondary? I'm like, LeBron has been yelling for that, it seems like, for 2 years or 3 years that he could be the man. So I don't think, it's funny how where we are now. Meanwhile, LeBron is playing all supernova again in these scenarios.
He's unbelievable right now.
Yeah. It's just, forget about just for a 38-year-old, he's playing incredible for a 28-year-old.
I think he's leading the NBA in scoring for the past month. It's unbelievable. You know what I think it is? I think Kareem's record's in sight, and he just wants to get there as soon as he can
and get it over with.
Yeah, and there's also something in my head. Okay. They play the Knicks in Madison Square Garden January 31st.
Right
now, that is well ahead of the target or the projected time.
Right. Most of the projections are that week before the All-Star break and the trade deadline. Right?
Yeah. That maybe that home game against Milwaukee. Yeah. But if he keeps it going, if he keeps it rolling, he could get there for that Madison Square Garden game. What if he gets to Madison Square Garden and he needs 50? What if he's 50 away?
Right.
I mean,
well, right now he's at 287 away. I want to say somewhere in that range. He needs about 28, 29 points a game, which he certainly can average because that's kind of what his thing is. So let's just call it 10 games. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 would put him at Oklahoma City. He would need to go crazy because the Knicks is 7 games away. That's tough.
You toss in a couple 35s, a couple 40s.
Yeah. He needs to have at least a couple 40s before that.
I think if he gets within 60 before that Madison Square Garden game, it's on.
You think he's going for it, right?
Going for it.
Yeah.
Because LeBron loves to do big things in the Garden.
Oh yeah.
Everybody wants to have a show in the Garden. Yeah. He's always talked about that. He's always mentioned it. Steph Curry broke the 3-point record in the Garden. Remember? I mean, that's a great stage to do it. So if he can get himself within 60 for that game, watch out.
Well, I'm personally rooting for him to take a few games off because I'm calling the February 11th game at Golden State on ESPN Radio.
That would be a good one.
And I would prefer, Bron, if you want to take a few games off, okay, at this pace that you're going right now, so that way I can have a legendary call on ESPN Radio. Selfishly, I would appreciate that if you could do that.
Yeah. Let's make it all about you.
Just come on, do a brother a favor. Come on.
I know.
So anyway, Now let's get into some of the stuff he has said. You and I have talked about this on radio.
Well, he is a must watch. Like last night, I actually skipped the game against the Kings because I had been to so many games lately. It's like, there's been a lot of teams that are, both the Lakers and the Clippers have been home a lot, so I just picking my spots a little.
Yeah.
And I skipped the game, so I watched it on TV, and I was like, I was about to turn it off on the post game.
No, never.
Wait, I gotta wait for LeBron.
Never. And he took a long time yesterday.
He did
during the Kings game. I was like, "Come on, is he not going to talk today? What are we doing?"
Yeah, I'm watching Spectrum. I want to move on. I watch my Bravo shows. Move on with my night. Go work out a little bit. Nope. I gotta wait for Bron.
Yeah, same thing. I always, it's funny. I always tell people, like when I go on like these local radio hits or on somebody else's podcast, I always say the best television isn't always just the game. Like the games obviously are fantastic, but the post games to watch your coaches,
the post games are amazing,
are incredible. Like I was having this conversation with the Denver folks a while back, and I actually said this to Michael Malone too. I said, early this season, when you were literally openly pining for your team to play defense on those post games, was some of the best television I had seen. He's like, "We're playing great in the clutch. I don't understand why we can't just play that kind of defense the entire game." And it was hilarious to watch. And he chuckled. He didn't think it was that funny though.
Yeah.
But to your point, these post games are great. So Bron talks yesterday. I actually thought LeBron was very measured yesterday and had like a good perspective, despite the fact they lost that game. Whereas clearly the game before that, the last loss before that, he was fuming. In the games previous to that, the Dallas game, he was not thrilled. And he has
Philly
had
game.
Yeah, Philly game as well.
Okay. Can we just I don't want to rant. I don't want this to sound like a rant.
Go.
But I just feel like because I've watched so many of these games at home and in person, it's like I've seen this movie before. Like we have to find a stat of how many times they've been within 5 points of a team late in the game, especially an over 500 team where they should have won the game. And there's some sort of bad play or two, mostly involving Westbrook.
Right.
And they lose. And it's just, I've seen that movie before, and it's really hard to watch because you kind of feel it coming. It's like Jaws. You're like, do, right? Like you can feel like, where's the meltdown going to come? Yeah. Where's the weird turnover? Where's the, they're going to bait him into trying to drive when he should pass it to LeBron, or at least LeBron should go get the ball.
Yeah.
Against Philly, it was it was like I could have written the script.
Yeah. It was brutal.
They had Philly right on the ropes.
Well, but are you with me on this? When Russ fumbled the ball when Joel was guarding him, right there, or he needs to swing it. Like he needs to move it. If you look at the play, Schroeder goes to him, like leans towards him, like give 100%. Me the ball. And he did it. And then Schroeder could have swung it to LeBron because there was still like 9 or 10 seconds on the clock.
So let's even back up further though. Okay. Yeah. So I don't even want to say that I've changed my view of it, because I still have the same view, which is that Russ has he's actually been really good. He should be getting a lot of credit for embracing the 6-man role.
Correct.
I think, he's in the running for 6 man of the year.
Yeah.
100%. And I would have never guessed that coming into the season. And I want to give him his flowers for that, because none of us saw that coming, and good for you and good for Darvin Ham for getting him to a place where he could embrace that. And he's actually been very effective in that second unit, kind of making that his own.
Yeah.
But at the end of games, there's just so many times where there's a play where the other team, it's like you don't even need a scouting report. It's just they bait Russ into doing something like that, because they'll put a big on him, or they'll sort of show him a single team, and there's a sort of expectation that Russ is just going to go try to win this. He's going to try to take the last shot or whatever it is. And when he should swing it, when he should, all the other things that he's been doing all game long the right way, go out the window. And but I think I almost had a different view of it in that Philly game, because there was a lot of time on the clock for that last play.
Yep.
And Russ goes to get the ball. Like he goes like, I'm the point guard on the court here. And by the way, shooters on the court too, but Russ goes to get the ball from the inbounder, and Bron is kind of near him on the other side of the court. But like, if you're in this, like if you're Bron and you've seen this movie before and you've been doing everything, part of me just says, go over to Russ and do a dribble handoff. Like, just grab the ball from him.
Right.
Like, don't let him do what we all know is coming next. You know what I mean? Like, with my toddler, like, I know when he sees something, like, he sees that ball pit and it's bedtime. Yeah. And I'm like, don't let him see the ball pit, because you know what he's going to do. He's going to run over there and jump in it. He can't help himself.
Yeah, it's over. Yeah.
It's like his nature. That, like, Russ at the end of a game is like, I got this. Let's go. I'm going to win this.
Yes.
And good for you for having that confidence. But it's like you have to save him from himself.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, so part of me is like, run over and do a dribble handoff. Like just grab the ball from him.
Yeah, I don't know. I get what you're saying. I just don't see that happening either, though. Like, but I do get it, right?
You
like,
see what I mean? Like, if this was the first time, okay. If this was the fifth time, okay. But it's like the 10th time.
Yeah. To your point, they're 10-12 in clutch games, which is 5 points, within 5 points in the last 5 minutes. And it's funny because we focus on their offense as we do generally in this sport. Yeah. Their offense is actually not terrible in that spot. They're actually pretty good. Their offense is the 10th best offensive rating in clutch time. You know where they're really bad? Their defense is 28th in clutch time. They are giving up 123 points per 100 possessions in clutch time. It is god awful. The only teams worse than them, the Charlotte Hornets and the Detroit Pistons in clutch time.
Both teams who are trying to lose right now.
Right.
Okay.
So that's the issue that I think people need to focus on. Yeah. Is like, that's part of the equation too. But my thing to you is, like, he's clearly, LeBron, that is, openly pining for help. How realistic is the help?
I don't see it as all that realistic. I see there's a few trades they could make. But everything, see, here's the problem when you don't have a lot of firsts. Like, you don't have a lot of assets. Like, you have to be really, really judicious with them. And you can't just, like, waste them. You know how, like, you have a lot of money, you can buy stuff and hope it works out, and then you go, oh, I'll try to return that on Amazon if it doesn't work out, but you probably never do, because you don't get around to it and it just sits around.
Although if you're listening right now, you want to return something to Amazon, you can just go to your local Kohl's and they'll actually do it for you. There you go. Yeah. There's really a life hack. It's really easy
to return things on Amazon, and yet people just don't. Like, people just don't. I know I don't. I try to. And, like, every once in a while, I'll take, like, 5 things back.
Oh, no. My wife is great at that stuff. I'm like, that's got to go. She's like, boom, it's on. It's done right away.
Yeah. This isn't going to work. Let's return it. But I think with, like, with the Lakers, like, everybody else has more picks than them. And so they don't have to be as stingy with their picks.
Right.
So, like, a player, like, okay, you've heard the Knicks come up a little bit. Cam Reddish is a name I've heard. Emmanuel Quickly, yada, yada, yada. But a first-round pick is a lot.
Right.
Especially an unprotected first.
Well, and I wouldn't do a first-round pick for those guys you mentioned.
Yeah. But, Bogdanovich in Detroit, there's probably a Nerlens Noel component to that kind of package as well. Yeah. I might do that. He's averaging 20 points a game. The guy's a really good player. But a lot of other teams want him too. Like, that's the problem. And they have more to give. And
Detroit has at least said, I don't know how much I buy this, and you would know way more than me, that they may not deal him in this scenario.
I know.
Here's the other thing if you're the Lakers, okay? Now, he's on a good contract. I think he's on a descending contract. It's 19 next year and 18 the year after that. But that takes you out of your cap space for the following year, where you're going to have about $30 million. So it's like a really tough scenario.
Yeah, and they have been very, very protective of their cap space for next year, which is something that we used to hear in the Jim Buss, Mitch Kupchak era of, like, oh, cap space.
Right.
It's not usually how you get players in the NBA these days. Like, very rarely do you get a free agent by creating cap space. And if you need to create more cap space later, you can. There's always teams that will take your bad contracts if you're willing to incentivize them. Because they're trying to reach a salary floor, et cetera. So they have been protective of that in other trades and other trade discussions. So it's almost like that's another asset. Cap space is another asset. It's like another, I wouldn't call it the same value as a first round pick, but it's up there in terms of assets. There's, like, young players, there's future first, and there's cap space.
Right.
And if you look at the free agents this year, George, like, there are some really interesting names. Now, I'm not convinced Draymond Green will be a free agent. I could see a scenario where he just picks up the player option and stays there. He has a pretty big player option. And the teams that have cap space, I'm not sure really are going to want to commit all of it to him at his age and et cetera. He might be better off just staying right where he is.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Draymond Green, just for posterity, his player option is $27.5 million.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money to turn down and hope to make back up on your next deal.
Right.
I think what's interesting is she is like, there's other guys like James Harden has a player option. He can be a free agent.
Right.
Kyrie Irving, free agent. Chris Middleton, free agent. Fred VanVleet, etc. These are most of these players will probably just re-sign with their teams that we're mentioning. Chris Middleton probably. I think also when you talk about a guy like James Harden, that's an interesting name. I mean, James Harden, Kyrie, those are two interesting names because they kind of do what the Lakers need.
Okay, so you say that, and look, Kyrie has been linked to the Lakers in cap space even before. I mean, we were talking. Yeah. It was not realistic, but like him taking the mid-level or something ridiculous like that. Mm-hmm. But they're going to have about $30 million. You have James Harden out there. You have Kyrie potentially out there. How realistic are those options for the Lakers at not max money?
Right. I mean, it kind of depends on what the other market for those players is. I think Kyrie has played well enough that there will be other teams that will be interested in him. But for how long? Okay, how long a contract does he get? I think he's probably, because of his history and behavior over the past few years, I think he's probably a 2-1 guy or a 1-1 guy, like a 2-year contract but a team option on the second, or at best maybe a 3-year contract with a team option on the last year. So it's not going to be that deep of a market for him, but he's so talented. I do think there'll be teams that will talk themselves into him, and at least try to protect themselves on the deal. And then James Harden, okay, he's turned down so much money, George. If you think about how much money that man has turned down in Houston, in Brooklyn, I mean, that was a max extension. He would be making $60 million a year at the end of that extension that he turned down in Brooklyn. I think the idea was that he was going to get that contract in Philly, but he hasn't been offered that, and he hasn't played up to that level where you could say, all right, you're going to feel good about him making $62 million a year when he's age 38, And I think that situation in Philly feels very tenuous to me in terms of that team, that roster construction. Tyrese Maxey's due for a big payday. I can't imagine that they would mess around with that. He's going to get paid. He's a really good player, and he's young, and he's willing to come off the bench, which a lot of players in his position would not be willing to do, but he's doing it, and he's doing really well. DeAnthony Melton's been good for them, but Embiid's under contract long-term. Tobias Harris is up for an extension, I guess. It's a very expensive team that if they don't win this year, and what does win mean? I think it means at least out of the second round. Just have to get past that second round ceiling. If they lose in the second round again, what happens to that whole team?
Oh, I think if they lose in the second round again, to your point, Harden could be gone, right? Because he could opt out and figure out what he wants to do, which then means what happens with the big fella in that situation, right? Like what happens to Embiid if all of a sudden they lose another star? I mean, that's like the worst case scenario for Daryl Morey. Obviously, Harden leaves, and then Embiid is not satisfied with the current situation. I mean, the coach could be in peril in that scenario too. Yeah. There could be a lot of moving parts there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of teams that I feel like there's instability or pressure this year to win, and then there could be a lot of changes if they don't. And so, this is something to watch. But like Kyrie and James are interesting ideas. For a team like the Lakers, it would be they have enough money to compete in terms of a offer, and they'd have to be taking a considerable risk. But the skill sets for both players are there. Like who plays well next to LeBron historically? Guards like Dwayne Wade and Kyrie Irving, or a big like Anthony Davis, right? James Harden is a fantastic shooter. He's not a great catch and shoot guy, but he's another shot creator. He doesn't have to get by you to create offense. Like he's somebody who can carry the load. Kyrie obviously has already played well next to LeBron and would probably have a a nice reunion. It would probably feel good to him to play with them again, right? There's a sort of familiarity there, even though there was a trade request to not play together. But there's some interesting options. I don't see Middleton being an option just because he's with the Bucks. Why would he leave? Van Vliet's another really good player, but Toronto has to decide what it's going to do. So that cap space is valuable because there are free agent situations that are intriguing this summer.
Right. And look, Kyrie already has the history, as you mentioned, so you know how that's going to fit on the floor. The Harden one to me is fascinating because he does need the ball in his hands.
Yeah.
We've seen how that with Russ hasn't been always so great, except obviously a much bigger difference. James a better passer than Russ. James also a much better shooter, as you pointed out, than Russ. So the spacing is a lot better in those scenarios. It's not as clunky as it would be with Russ. But good Lord. Could you imagine, to your point, if let's say, because Philly was just in town recently with to play the two LA teams. I know Miami and Dallas were too, and I want to touch on them briefly because I know that since they were in town, I'm sure you've observed stuff about those teams as well. But could you imagine that, let's say Philly does, worst case scenario does happen, they lose again in the second round, right? And Harden's like, see ya, I'm out. Sorry, Daryl, I love you, but I got to figure something out on my own now. And that option is there for the Lakers. I mean, that was literally, I know Rob Pelinka talked about Kentavious Caldwell-Pope being mana from heaven, but that would literally be mana from heaven.
You know what, though? Can we revisit the KCP mana from heaven thing?
Sure.
They miss him. He was a good player.
They do. He's been great for Denver. So here's the thing.
Great for Denver.
Their four best lineups, in Denver, all have Joker, obviously, Aaron Gordon, and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Those are the three common denominators. He's a good player. Yeah. Like, I think people just dismissed him as a role player the same way they dismissed Kuzma. And then when you don't have those role players on your team, it's like, oh, what? Why does the team not work? Because there's not enough depth and there's not enough great rotation plays. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope was a really good on-ball defender. He didn't need the ball. He was a good catch and shoot guy. Like, they really missed him. I think he was one of those guys that you threw into a trade and people thought of as an afterthought. And that was really people are still, I know Laker fans get upset about Alex Caruso. Yeah. I think they miss KCP more. I agree 100%. Of those three guys, I know Kuz gets, he puts up a lot of points. I know, but I think KCP of those three is the most valuable in regards to what they need right now. Wow. So, all right. So keep an eye out for free agency. And now here's the thing. If they don't do anything, though, you then have to sell LeBron on, hey, the cap space is what's going to solve this and figure this out for us.
Yeah, but last year, what was the discussion that everybody wanted? Russ has to be traded. Russ has to go. Like, what are they going to do if they don't trade Russ? They're really going to bring Russ back? And I remember the whole time I was like, yes, they're going to bring Russ back.
You did.
And they're going to get a new coach and they're going to find somebody who's going to make it work or they're going to die trying, right? Okay. And guess what? Darvin Ham has made this work.
Yeah.
Now, that's not a shot at Frank Vogel. I think Frank's a really good coach. And I think that was a fairly impossible situation last year.
Yes.
Russ had to be humbled enough to be willing to even consider changing. And last year he was not. This year he was, especially 2-3 games into the year. I mean, I thought he was 5 games away from being sent home and maybe never to play in the NBA again. I mean, he was that close to being sent off to Exile Island, right? Don Wall Island, whatever you want to call it. And he got it together and he's really done well embracing this role. It's just the end of games is very frustrating, but I think he's kind of been exactly what they needed. The whole selling point for Russ was he's durable. He plays every game. When LeBron or AD or both eventually get hurt, Russ is able to carry the team and Russ is able to give you 20, 30 points. He's done that. He's been doing that. And
he's embraced the role. And look, early this season, the first month or so into the season, they were like something ridiculous, like 8 points worse when he was on the floor. Now, I mean, it's not a lot, but they're 0.3 points better. That's a huge swing when you think about it. Yeah,
it's something. And I don't know what Darvin said to him. I don't know what Russ said to Darvin. I don't know if there was other people involved. My understanding is his new agent, Jeff Schwartz, has done a good job in this situation, in this role. But I think a lot of it was just Darvin and Russ getting on the same page and and somehow Darvin getting through to him.
Yeah. Well,
earning that trust.
Darvin has clearly made some rookie mistakes as a coach, and he's been open about that. And that's part of the growing process. But I think, to your point, managing the egos has been something that he's been fantastic at. And that is a huge part of being an NBA coach. There's no doubt.
Huge part, especially for this kind of a team.
Yeah, right.
With three future Hall of Famers, I remember when he first took over the job, and I remember one of the funny things I haven't earlier. I was like, is Patrick Beverley going to do a podcast? Oh boy.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah.
As if we, this is like that team where you already had the LeBron, AD, Russ thing. Then you have Pat Bev, and he's going to probably talk because he's a talker. Yeah. We've had him on TV with us, right? He's a talker. I mean, this is going to be a wild show. Yeah. And it hasn't been that bad. In terms of drama.
Right. And honestly, if they're healthy, I still, in an open West, they may still have a shot at least being a playoff team and being interesting at that time of year. I
agree.
We'll see what happens. I actually believe that's if they can get healthy, and that's a big if because we talked about it with the Clippers to start this podcast. I think that they are a team you don't want to see. Like if you're Memphis or Denver, like do you want to see like the Lakers as a 7 or 8? Or do you want to see Golden State as a 7 or 8? Like you don't want to, especially if all those teams are healthy. Like that's not necessarily like a great reward for being the 1 or 2 seed or 3 seed, depending on the scenario. All right, last thing before we let you go, and you've been great with your time. So we mentioned that Dallas and Miami also has been through here. There's been a lot of teams doing the double dip in LA where they've had a bunch of days off in LA. Let's do Miami first and then Dallas last. Miami, I mean, when they lost that game to the Lakers, they beat the Clippers. Eric Spoelstra was beside himself because no AD, no LeBron, and they clearly relaxed. And they kind of used that game. That to me was the low point of the year for them, where Spoelstra was like he was furious at them in that effort. But they have since then turned it around. They've played fairly well moving forward. They've now crept to the 6th spot in the Eastern Conference, where they're now in the playoff race. And they're a move away, I think, from being the team they've been the last couple of years. I don't know what that move is. I don't know if that move is out there. But what do you make of what they've been through here?
Well, I think the big issue for them is, do they need to settle the whole whose team is it? Tyler Hero and Bam Adebayo have a really good thing going, and they're both starting now. And then you have Kyle Lowry and Jimmy Butler, and they have a friendship and a good thing going. But Jimmy's been better lately. Kyle's coming around; he's effective, but like they don't seem like they're all on the same page. All 4 of them on the same court and the same page don't feel like a real fit, which is why Hero came off the bench last year. Right. And so either they make that all work, or somebody goes. And I don't know who it is. It's probably not Hero or Bam, because those are the future. So it's and
probably not Jimmy, because Jimmy's their best player still in theory, especially crunch time.
Right. So, but Kyle's contract is such that it'd be hard to find anybody who would give you a lot of value for him. And so then why would you trade him for a negative? So there's, is there a lineup? Does somebody have to go? Do you change the lineups around a little bit to, kind of the same way Darvin did with Russ? That feels like something that's a little unsolved and needs to be worked on still. But I think with the Heat, like they're always there. That's always what impresses me about the Heat. Even when you see all the problems that they have or the issues that they're working through, they're always there. And like I know they have Duncan Robinson on a contract and he doesn't play and he's whatever it is, but I don't know that I could see a scenario where he comes back from the surgery that he had and then he's right back in the lineup and he's right back in the rotation. Max Strus, the guy who's kind of taking his minutes, and Oladipo, the guy who's taking his minutes. Both of the Strus is a free agent. Oladipo is good, but has been injury prone in the past. So they just seem to manage their issues well. Like anything that other teams might get derailed by, the Heat just work through them. And I think they're always there. And I don't see them making a big move right now. I think they're the kind of team that is always looking for the next superstar who might be available. Right.
They're very much like the Lakers in that sense, and that makes sense because also Pat Riley is there.
Yeah. And so look, everybody's waiting, is Kevin Durant going to stay in Brooklyn? What happens if, Kyrie leaves? Or, there's that trade request is out there, and he's played so well and they've played so well since then that it kind of went away. But, see what happens in the offseason. The other team, I think Dallas is a really interesting team. I don't see Luka being the type to really make noise and cause problems, but he definitely needs some help.
Oh my God, yeah. But Mark Cuban got upset at a muralist the other day. Did you see that story?
No.
There's a muralist, famous muralist in Dallas, who's obviously done a ton of Maverick stuff over the years, did a mural where he basically said in the mural, Luka needs some help. And Cuban apparently got really upset.
I mean, look, everybody can see it. You can see Luka is playing. He plays every single minute of the second half.
Yeah.
Every single minute. And the other night when he was in LA, he played every single minute of the second half, overtime and double overtime.
Right.
That's not sustainable. And then he has to not, and then he has to not do anything for a little while and, yada, yada, yada. And so, it takes a game off here or there just to recover from this kind of strain. This is not a sustainable model. And I think, but they know that. In talking to the Mavs, they know that this is not sustainable for Luka, and they know they have to get him help. And they don't want to be in a position where they seem desperate, and they have time for this. You don't want to rush into things, which is how you make bad decisions and you get stuck with bad contracts. You have to undo later. And so and they also can't make other teams trade them somebody. But right. I think when you look at the Mavs, you have to look at Luka in the same way that you look at early stage LeBron in Cleveland. There was a parade of players that they got to try to quote get him help, right? Remember Anton Jameson, Shaq? Larry Hughes, Shaq. Yeah. Nobody quite worked or was enough. And I think that's kind of where the Mavericks are with Luka. Don't be the early stage Cavs where you sort of encumber yourself with quick fix Band-Aid solutions that aren't really enough. Don't do that. Wait for the right move, even if it costs you a season or two. And I think they're being patient. And I think Cuban seems patient. Nico Harrison, their GM, seems patient for now. The pressure maybe in the Dallas market is high, but I think for them, they seem like they're all on the same page and they're okay with this.
Yeah, and Luka, to your point, hasn't made waves, although I believe a while back he was asked and he just said, hey, man, I'm under contract. You know what I mean? He didn't, those maybe that wasn't, I'm paraphrasing, but it was basically he kind of just pushed the question aside. And I think people took that as, oh my God, he didn't commit to us forever. And it's come on, man, you need to relax.
I know, relax.
That's what he should say is I'm under contract, because the stars, as we've seen LeBron do over the years, has to put or apply a certain amount of pressure as well to the organization in those scenarios.
Yeah. And he's, Luka is the type who doesn't want to get involved in any of that kind of drama.
Right. He just wants the ball. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, you look at who they need for him the same way you look at who LeBron needs. Who has Bron played well with over the years? A playmaking guard, Kyrie Irving type, Dwayne Wade type, or a finishing big like an Anthony Davis. Okay. Right. There are players like that out there. Okay. And, Zach LaVine's a guy that may come available depending on what Chicago decides to do. There's a lot of players in Charlotte that would fit that kind of a role. There's bigger names out there you can think about, but you can't be in a hurry to do anything, right? There's a lot of there's a lot of teams you just kind of have to watch and target and pick the right spot and the right moment to make a deal. But I do think this is solvable for them. They just have to be patient.
Yeah, patience is a virtue, but most of these teams don't have it.
Yeah.
They try to espouse the virtues of it, but it is not as easy to deal with it in practicality and in reality. Hey, if you missed any part of this, get it on the ESPN LA YouTube. Smash the like button, like this video, subscribe to the ESPN LA YouTube page, and of course the audio accompaniment is on the Sedano and Cap podcast feed, wherever you get your podcast, Google, Spotify, the ESPN app, the ESPN LA app, Apple, wherever you get them, you'll get this, and you'll get people like Momo who give me plenty of time and give me plenty of insight. Momo, thank you for the time as always. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Have a good one.
See ya. That'll do it for Lockdown. See you later.